We're into the deepest recesses of hell.
That's not a line from a movie. That's not a character. That's Jim Caviezel, one of the most recognizable actors alive, describing what he says is happening to children right now on this planet.
It's an 8-armed octopus, and if you take just trafficking out, that arm will grow back. You have to take the head.
And then there's this.
When the public wakes up to this whole thing and sees films like this, people won't be able to walk down the street ever again.
He said that years before the Epstein files opened, before the names came out, before the flight logs were public, before the photographs. And now, Joe Rogan, a man with 40 million listeners, a man who turned down Jeffrey Epstein personally, is raising something that very few people in media will say out loud, that the forces Jim Caviezel named and described in detail may not be done with him, and that his safety, a concern that observers and commentators have begun raising openly, may no longer be something anyone can take for granted. But here's what nobody is connecting. Let's start with who Jim Caviezel actually is. Yeah, because the context is everything. Most people first encountered him as Jesus Christ in The Passion of the Christ, one of the highest grossing independent films in cinematic history. That performance alone should have bought him a permanent seat at Hollywood's table. A guaranteed future of prestige projects, franchise offers. He was, by every conventional measure, someone the industry wanted to keep close. He walked away from all of it, not slowly, not reluctantly. He attached himself to Sound of Freedom, a small, underfunded film about child that no major studio would touch, distribute, or even publicly acknowledge. Think about that choice for a moment. An actor at the peak of his cultural capital. A film that guaranteed controversy, a subject matter that Hollywood actively avoided. He chose it anyway. Sound of Freedom told the true story of Tim Ballard, a real federal agent of the Department of Homeland Security, who walked away from his career to personally rescue children being trafficked across Latin America. It was directed by Alejandro Monteverde and produced on a budget of just $14.5 million. By Hollywood's standards, it was practically invisible, but the studios didn't just ignore it. According to Caviezel himself, stated publicly, on record, every major studio and major network was, in his words, told to stay away from this film, and most of them obeyed. A movie about rescuing children from trafficking networks, and the most powerful institutions in entertainment collectively decided it should not be seen. Ask yourself why. When the film was finally released without major studio backing, without a marketing campaign, without red carpet events, it made $251 million at the box office. It outperformed Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. It beat Indiana Jones. Both of those films had $100 million marketing machines behind them. Sound of Freedom had almost none of that. And it still won. The plan to bury the film failed completely, but failure in Hollywood, especially failure of that kind, has consequences. And those consequences didn't land on the studios. They landed on Caviezel. Here's the thing about the Sound of Freedom press tour. Most actors, when they're promoting a film, stay inside a very specific lane. They discuss their preparation, they thank the director, they keep it safe, they go home. Jim Caviezel didn't do any of that. He used every platform he was given: Steve Bannon's War Room, Jordan Peterson's podcast, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and began connecting dots publicly, out loud, on record, in ways that most people in Hollywood would never go near. He wasn't promoting a film anymore, he was describing a system. He described a global trafficking industry worth an estimated $150 billion annually. He argued the number of children currently trapped in these networks exceeds the total count of people enslaved during the entire 350-year period of the transatlantic slave trade. These aren't numbers he invented. They draw from documented estimates used by international organizations, though exact figures remain disputed by researchers. But the single moment that permanently redrew the line around him was when he went further, when he began describing what he called the deeper mechanics of the industry.
The adrenaline of children, look, where we're at right now, hopefully we need your prayers. Essentially, you have adrenaline in your body. I'll just simplify it. And when you are scared, you produce it. If a child knows he's going to his body will secrete this.
Now, whether you believe that claim, whether you think it's grounded in documented reality, or in the territory of speculation, the reaction to it is what matters. The moment those words entered the mainstream conversation, something shifted. In the eyes of the institutions he was describing, Jim Caviezel had gone from being an inconvenient filmmaker to something else entirely, a threat. And threats, as Caviezel himself has described, and as the events that followed would seem to confirm, get handled. Here's what the intelligence and media apparatus does, and Caviezel has described this directly. When someone with a major platform starts saying too much, it doesn't debate, it doesn't argue facts, it doesn't engage on the merits, it erases. And the first target wasn't Caviezel himself. It was the man standing directly beside him, Tim Ballard. The real person behind A Sound of Freedom was not a theorist or a Hollywood figure. He was a former DHS federal agent, someone who had been inside these operations on the ground, someone who understood exactly how these systems functioned. Caviezel had the platform and the public attention. Ballard had the knowledge. Together, they were a dual threat, a storyteller and an operator pointing at the same system simultaneously. In July 2023, at the exact peak of Sound of Freedom's box office dominance, Tim Ballard was removed as CEO of Operation Underground Railroad, the organization he founded. Consider the timing. The film is breaking records. The public conversation about trafficking is louder than it has been in years. Donations to Our are surging, and in that specific window, the man who built the organization gets thrown out of it. The mechanism was a wave of misconduct accusations, filed by multiple employees almost simultaneously. An independent law firm was rapidly deployed, and it reached its conclusions with what Caviezel and his supporters described as remarkable speed.
I am going to grant the motion by the moving defendants, OUR, the Spear Fund, and Ms. Russin, and dismiss count 15 as to those defendants with prejudice.
But here is what the mainstream coverage never properly told you. In November 2025, prosecutors in Salt Lake City quietly declined to file any criminal charges against Tim Ballard. No charges, no trial. Insufficient evidence. After all of it, the headlines, the investigations, the organizational collapse, the public humiliation, they walked away. There was no press conference, no segment on the evening news saying the accusations had fallen apart, just silence. Because the silence came after the window of maximum damage had already closed. The goal was never a courtroom conviction. The goal was to destroy Ballard's credibility at the exact moment it mattered most, and then quietly disappear before the public noticed the accusation had crumbled. With Ballard gone, the machine shifted. Alejandro Monteverde, the director of Sound of Freedom, suddenly found himself in the center of a media storm. The questions weren't about filmmaking. They were about Caviezel's statements, the controversies, the associations. The message was clear: distance yourself. And Alejandro, who understood exactly how much power was pointed at the film, began drawing a careful line between himself and Caviezel's public narrative. He acknowledged the film, but stepped back from the broader claims. He later admitted publicly that when the controversy exploded, his first instinct wasn't to fight, it was to run, to hide. That's not cowardice. That's someone who understood that he wasn't the real target anyway. Now let's bring in Joe Rogan, because his role in this story is specific and it matters.
I'm in the files for not going, because Jeffrey Epstein was trying to meet with me.
Oh, I did see that.
Yeah, and I was like, what?
I'm like, no thanks.
Yeah.
Aren't you glad?
Yeah, but I would have never went anyway.
Rogan has a specific kind of credibility when it comes to Epstein. He was apparently in Epstein's contact list, not as a participant, but as a target for recruitment. He turned it down. That matters because it means Rogan understands, from personal proximity, how that recruitment process worked.
Like, if you were an intelligence agent, you know, like a Jeffrey Epstein type deal, that'd be the way to do it. Big old crazy party, get everybody loose.
When the Epstein files began releasing first in December 2025 under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, then in January 2026 with over 3 million pages of documents, flight logs, emails, photographs, Rogan and commentator Kurt Metzger were watching. Not just for names, for behavior, because the way people react when their world starts collapsing around them tells you everything. And what Rogan noticed across multiple public figures simultaneously was a pattern. Tom Hanks, Ellen DeGeneres, Oprah Winfrey, Jay-Z, and Beyonce. Not one of them publicly addressed the Epstein files directly. What they did instead was move.
If you have esteemed scientists, Nobel laureates, scholars, all these different world leaders, bankers, famous singers, famous actors, they're all there. So that's the way you get people to do it.
Tom Hanks had quietly obtained honorary Greek citizenship years before the files became public. He built a compound on the island of Antiparos. He converted to Greek Orthodoxy. He began telling interviews he was 110% Greek. West Point had scheduled him to receive the Thayer Award, one of the highest civilian honors they give. Weeks before the ceremony, the event was canceled. No public explanation. Ellen DeGeneres, according to reporting cited online and in commentary, sold her Montecito properties and relocated to the English Cotswolds at significant financial loss, apparently accepting less than asking price to get out quickly. She initially told the public she left because of the election. Rogan wasn't buying it. Oprah Winfrey, meanwhile, reportedly fortified her Maui compound and showed up at Paris Fashion Week, a move commentators described as a calculated two-pronged approach. Secured at home, projecting normality abroad. Jay-Z extracted $57.75 million in liquidity from his Bel Air mansion through Morgan Stanley's private banking division, a property originally purchased for $52.8 million, and quietly secured a 58-acre plot in the Cotswolds. reportedly within 5 minutes of Ellen DeGeneres' property.
You got some girl from some Eastern Bloc country that's rubbing your and you don't know that she's 16, and she takes you in a room, and that room is filled with cameras. We're probably facing the effects of that right now. I bet there's decisions that were made, there's influence that got moved around.
Now, to be clear about all of this, these are allegations. These are patterns identified by commentators and investigators, not court verdicts. Names appearing in Epstein documents don't constitute proof of wrongdoing. Context matters. Peripheral associations exist. And some of these individuals have publicly denied any improper involvement. But, and this is the part that matters for Caviezel specifically, none of these people have publicly addressed the questions, and the ones who were asked, according to the documents Rogan and others have cited, gave answers that subsequent documentary evidence appeared to contradict. Prince Andrew told the BBC he had completely cut contact with Epstein. A 2011 email released as part of the DOJ documents reportedly showed Andrew writing to Epstein directly after a compromising photograph was published, using the phrase, "We are in it together." Bill Clinton maintained he barely knew Epstein. The December 2025 documents included photographs of Clinton at Epstein properties, alongside other high-profile names. When Congress opened a formal investigation in January 2026, both Bill and Hillary Clinton declined to testify. Bill Gates admitted in February 2026 to 2 affairs and confirmed that Epstein had attempted to blackmail him using information about one of them. Howard Lutnick, currently the United States Secretary of Commerce, described Epstein publicly as gross and said he had cut ties with him decades ago. Rogan played audio clips suggesting a different characterization. These are the verified contours of what the files revealed. And this is the world that Jim Caviezel described in specific detail before any of those files were ever made public. Let's talk about what has happened to Jim Caviezel professionally since Sound of Freedom. Before the film, he was a working actor with a credible, visible body of work. The Passion of the Christ, The Count of Monte Cristo, the long-running CBS series Person of Interest. He was someone Hollywood studios could work with after the film and specifically after the press tour that changed.
I'd like to work again, but I've never been a guy who would sell his soul to get, money or fame. It was never my goal.
Read that carefully. I'd like to work again. For an actor of his profile, someone with a critically acclaimed resume, and a film that generated $251 million at the box office, the silence that has followed is, by any industry standard, conspicuous. That silence is not an accident. When you openly describe a $150 billion global industry, when you name the mechanisms by which powerful institutions protect themselves, when you stand on national platforms and implicate people with direct access to Hollywood financing and studio decision-making, studios stop calling, not necessarily because they disagree with you, but because the people who control the money make clear that your name is now radioactive. And in an industry built entirely on access and relationships, radioactive means unemployable.
And it's disgusting that the media hasn't covered it like they should.
The disgust in his voice when he says that is not performance. It is the sound of someone who understands that media silence isn't negligence. It's a choice. And it's here at this specific intersection that the concern about Caviezel's safety begins to feel less like speculation and more like something worth examining seriously. Joe Rogan hasn't issued a formal, specific public warning about Jim Caviezel's physical safety on record. Let's be accurate about that. But what Rogan has done consistently across multiple discussions is describe the mechanism by which the Epstein network operated. A mechanism built on total control, on blackmail, on compromised institutions, on the willingness to destroy anyone who threatened the system's exposure.
We get everybody loose.
And get the cameras
Get them the
rolling
yayo. Get them the yayo.
and everything else.
Get them everything you need. Get fired up. Get those cameras rolling. And now you got everybody under wraps.
And people who understand that system, people who have watched how it operates, have begun raising a question that is uncomfortable but necessary. What happens to the person who names the system loudest? What happens to the person who has the most specific platform? The most credibility with a non-Hollywood audience? The most documented history of refusing to stay quiet? Jim Caviezel has described feeling hunted. Not metaphorically. He has described the specific forces arrayed against him: intelligence infrastructure, media apparatus, institutional legal mechanisms as real, coordinated, and operational. And the events that followed his Sound of Freedom press tour appear, to those who track these patterns, to validate exactly what he described. His closest ally, Tim Ballard, was dismantled by a coordinated misconduct campaign that later collapsed completely, but not before it did its intended damage. The director of his film publicly distanced himself from Caviezel's statements to protect his own career. The media spent its energy discrediting him rather than investigating the questions he raised. And his professional professional output has gone conspicuously quiet in the years since. How do the three-letter agencies not know about this? His answer, the one he keeps returning to, is that they do know. That this isn't a failure of intelligence, that it's a feature of it. And if that's true, if the intelligence apparatus is aware of these networks and has chosen, for whatever reason, to allow them to function, then the man publicly asking that question on congressional record, in front of national audiences, with receipts that man is not safe in any conventional sense. Not because he's necessarily facing a specific, credible threat that can be documented and named, but because the playbook he described, isolate, discredit, dismantle, silence, has already been run against everyone around him. And he's still standing.
And I hear the screams in my heart.
On April 26th, Jim Caviezel walked into Congress and gave formal testimony. Not as an actor promoting a project, as someone bearing witness. He put 850,000 on the record. That is the number of children he testified are currently missing in the United States alone. Not globally in some abstract sense, missing in a country with the most sophisticated law enforcement infrastructure on Earth.
I had no choice but to go in, and I hear the screams in my heart.
His question to Congress was simple. It still doesn't have a satisfying answer. How does a network operating at the scale he described, $150 billion annually, millions of children, documented connections to the highest levels of political and financial power, operate without the intelligence community knowing? Let's be honest about the full picture of what Jim Caviezel has sacrificed. He had a career most actors dream about, a cultural legacy cemented in film history, a platform he could have used for any number of comfortable, profitable things. He could have done franchise films. He could have taken the streaming deals. He could have said nothing. He didn't, and the machine responded accordingly. His name is now attached to controversy in every industry database casting directors and producers consult. His association with a film that generated $251 million doesn't translate into opportunity. It translates into a warning flag. He has been professionally isolated. His closest operational ally was destroyed by a coordinated campaign that later fell apart too late to matter. The director of his film ran for cover. The media looked the other way, and through all of it, with his career under pressure, his allies dismantled one by one. The full weight of institutional power pointed in his direction. He hasn't moved. He went to Congress. He put numbers on the record. He stood in front of cameras and said the same things he's always said. Because here's what Caviezel understands, and what Joe Rogan, in his own way, has been saying to 40 million people. The Epstein files are real, the names are real, the island was real, the flights were real, and the people who were called conspiracy theorists for connecting these dots years ago, before the documents, before the DOJ releases, before Congress opened its investigation, they don't look so crazy anymore. The question now, the only question left, is whether the people who protected this system for decades will face accountability, or whether power, as it so often does, simply protects itself, and whether the man who stood up and said all of this out loud years before the files confirmed, it will still be standing when the answer finally arrives. He came for the truth. They came for him. He hasn't moved an inch. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Jim Caviezel's isolation was coordinated? Do the Epstein file revelations change how you see his warnings? And do you think the names in those documents will ever truly face accountability? Or does power simply protect itself forever? Subscribe if you're new. You know what this channel is about.